thank you for taking some time out of your schedule to join us today. Just a couple of quick things for me before we get started. For those that don't know me, my name is Ryan Greer. I work with the firm Prairie Sky Strategy, and I'm also co-chair of the Canadian Chamber's National Cannabis Working Group. The National Cannabis Working Group is also co-chaired by Nathan Weiss. Nathan, are you with us on the line?
I am. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for partaking in this important conversation.
Excellent. So I think, as we all know, or certainly any of you that have dialed into a few of these in the past, this will be a little repetitive, so forgive me for a moment, but this is in preparation for Health Canada's statutory review of the Cannabis Act, which is scheduled to begin this October, which is the 3-year anniversary of recreational adult use legalization. So in advance of that, the Chamber and the National Cannabis Working Group announced last fall that we'd be leading an industry review of the Act so that we can try to find some consensus and identify some of the industry's biggest priorities and advocate those to the department in advance of their review. So this is the 5th of 6 sessions that we've been running that started last fall and will run through a few weeks from now. This is just the beginning of our process. It'll be followed by more targeted consultations with our working group members, public health advocates, academics, and others through the winter and the spring, looking to arrive at recommendations that we can then advocate on, again, well in advance of Health Canada beginning its own work this fall. Off the top, I'd like to first thank working group members Lisa Kearney from Davies and Eric Foster from Denton's. We are incredibly fortunate as a working group to have these accomplished cannabis lawyers and their firms supporting this effort. And I'm going to turn things over to Eric here in a few moments to moderate today's session. Just two quick housekeeping notes. I want to remind anyone who's on the line, especially if you haven't joined us for one of our previous sessions, that this is a public consultation. So members of the media and or governments or regulators may be present for some or all the sessions. So as with any public event, please keep in mind that your comments during the session may be attributed to you or your organization. If you have any comments that you would like to make that you would not like on the quote-unquote public record from this consultation or any documentation that you'd like to share, you can do so via the email address on the screen, which is cannabis@chamber.ca. So just to reiterate, any comments made today are on the public record and can be attributed to you. We have one more session scheduled after this one, and it's on ancillary business issues, which is obviously a pretty wide swath. That's scheduled for next Wednesday, February 17th. If you haven't yet registered for that session, we will be sending around the links following this meeting. You can also find it on the Canadian Chamber's events page on its website. Very quickly, again, if you haven't participated in one of these, we're running this on this life-size platform, which has a hand-raising function on the lower part of your screen. Christy Murray, who's managing things from the chamber to make sure this runs smoothly, has everybody except for a few of us on mute. Once Eric has sort of called on you after raising your hand in the queue that shows up, Christy will make you available to unmute yourself, after which you can speak up. We've set it up this way just to prevent too much background noise, which can step on a few of these meetings. So please raise your hand if you'd like to intervene, and Eric will call on you, and Christy will give you the ability to unmute yourself. There's also a chat function on the bottom of your screen. With all of the previous meetings, we've used this very effectively. If you want to agree with somebody, share some information, a link, concur, raise another point, please engage through the chat platform. It's been a very effective way, and we will be taking the transcript of that chat and also using that as our consultation record. It's been a really useful function for our first few sessions. So lastly, if you could please, when you're speaking up, just identify yourself and your organization so we know who we're speaking with or hearing from. That'll help us tremendously in organizing what we take away from this. And as I mentioned just before we started, we've set up a series of poll questions for participants to answer that will inform our consultation. The link to fill it out is at the bottom right of the slide on your screen. So it's Slido, meeting code 7962. This is one way if you don't want to be on the public record. None of the comments in that poll, some of which are open-ended, will be attributed to you. So if there's some views that you want to share that you wouldn't maybe want to be identified for whatever reason, you can do it through the poll as well, and that'll be anonymous. So with that, let's move on to today's discussion, which is the illicit market, anti-money laundering. I'm quite interested to follow this one. I think on one hand, it's quite remarkable that in a couple of short years, half to 2/3 of cannabis sales now take place through a legal regulated market. On the other hand, it's also a bit underwhelming that in a legal regulated market, we still have half to 1/3 of sales taking place through a legal channel. So I'm interested to track this discussion and see where it goes. So with that, let's turn it over to Eric Foster from Denton's to lead the discussion.
Terrific. Thanks so much for the introduction. And for those of you, I do see a lot of familiar names on the participant list. Definitely see some new names. So for those who don't know me, my name is Eric Foster. I'm a partner at Denton's and I lead our cannabis practice. Really important initiative. Thrilled to be involved in it, collaborating with Lisa Kearney and the Davies team as well. So really important topic today. I think one that a lot of folks who've attended our past sessions have kind of been waiting for to talk about in terms of how we're going to continue to try to tackle in a better manner the illicit market. I want to just remind folks, I'm pretty careful at watching the hand raising function. It's not, necessarily the most intuitive, but I do follow along. I will call on you. So I really want to encourage proactive discussion. I know sometimes when we've started these sessions, people have been a little shy at first, and then it really kicks into high gear like we had last week or 2 weeks ago when we had to stop and people still wanted to keep going. So really encourage folks to raise their hand and chime in with input. I think in terms of a direction of the conversation, I think we can follow along with some of the materials sent out by the chamber, but in terms of kind of where to start, I'd love to have a bit of a discussion on just the general factors that do continue to support these billions and billions of dollars flowing into the illicit market. What are those supply and demand factors? And then maybe shift to a discussion around enforcement measures, really focusing more on policy tools that governments could implement. It's not super productive to, more police, more enforcement, but really trying to focus on those policy tools that governments can potentially enact to reduce both the supply, but also the demand, right? There's an equally important component of encouraging people to want to go to the legal market rather than the illicit market. And then after that, maybe shift to a general discussion about the real types of changes and trying to get a little bit into the nitty gritty of the things we can actually try to change in the Cannabis Act itself that would enable the regulated market to better compete with the illicit market. So those are kind of some of the themes I think we're trying to discuss and tackle today. Not sure if anybody wants to be brave and put their hand up and jump right in. Check my chat and my list. I don't see any hands. I don't see any hands raised right now, and this has been a common theme at the very beginning of these sessions, and then everybody gets really excited. So, I see Malka, who of course has contributed in very meaningful ways the last couple sessions. So maybe we'll go to Malka and then over to Cameron Bishop for some initial thoughts and remarks.
Eric, so much. My name is Malka LaBelle from the Green Generation Company. My question is, number one, is if anyone from the banking world is on this call, is part one, that works for a bank or a division of a bank. And part two is around what are banks doing, not in the looking at cannabis companies, but in looking at every other company that they have access to in this space. Thank you.
So I'm not sure if anybody, is from a bank, and I'll defer to the participants if they want to identify themselves. And maybe Malka, you just clarify. Let's dig a little bit deeper into that comment. So what exactly are you looking? Like maybe just if you could just re-clarify the question a little bit, and then happy we can chat about it for sure.
Sure. So my work as a consultant with people within the cannabis industry in Canada and in other countries, I get a lot of people requesting more information around how to, start a business or work within the cannabis industry in Canada. And usually it's around the time when they're trying to figure out a banking situation. So they have a company and they would like to do business in Canada or the US or one or the other. And they're usually coming to me because they're looking for financing or access to capital from investors or private lenders or other. And a lot of the times the hurdles are around just getting a bank account. And I completely understand that within Canada. And I have talked to a number of different banks that I have access to, both personally and professionally. And I sort of have a short list of banks that I personally deal with that have been open to having accounts for businesses either related to cannabis or ancillary around that. But in further to my own exposure, what I've learned is even those banks that were comfortable with it, they still have tremendous hurdles in place for businesses in that area. And I've asked them to partake in this conversation, or at least listen to it, to hear what is happening within the industry at large, so that they have a sense of what some of the concerns are. So that was the reason why I want to know if anyone was from a bank or that had trickled down to that to the individuals. And in the second part about it is around other companies. So we seem to be, just in the questions on Slido and in other contexts, there seems to be a lot of very clear, detailed looking at the cannabis industry in terms of the anti-money laundering or things around it. The questions are in the Slido. This is why I brought it up. But what I think is extremely missing out in this conversation is what is happening in other businesses with GST numbers that are legally allowed to operate as businesses in Canada, but that are not being recognized as essentially moving money around because they're selling products that are cannabis but are not licensed to do so. And that's the area that I think needs a lot more scrutiny, and not the cannabis companies, but the ones that are doing other things that don't have the appropriate authority to sell products, even though they're using GST numbers, bank terminals, and other perfectly acceptable things for the public to recognize as safe in handling products. So that's the source of my questions.
Yeah, no, terrific points as usual. And again, I think, one of the things that this group's always been advocating for is treating this industry just like any other industry, whether it's through financial institution relationships or otherwise. In terms of, general comment, I'll say on the banks, we see this, hear comments like this day in and day out, and it's oddly good timing because our cannabis team at our firm this morning was on the phone with one of, Canada's largest banks, and we had about 40 people from the bank on the line talking about cannabis regulation, both in Canada and the US. So this is top of mind, and it's really challenging, I think, for industry participants. I think the financial institutions are getting more and more up to speed every day. Some are certainly faster than others. And then you've got kind of credit unions and other more alternative financial institutions that do seem to have a little bit more flexibility. But it's a really important point, in trying to tie it back, I guess, to the theme of today. It's that I think those financial institutions are still concerned that there is such an active illicit market in Canada, that it does create some concerns from their perspective and from a know your client perspective in terms of who are they going to bank, and making sure that those are really legitimate people. And I know I said we'd jump to Cameron next, but I do see Fern Glowinski has her hand up, and knowing that Fern is the CEO of a leading payment provider and can help provide simplified payment solutions in the cannabis industry, maybe we'll jump over to Fern, because I suspect you may have some comments on this topic too, and then we'll come back to Cameron right afterwards.
Great, thanks, Eric. Hi, everybody. Nice to be with you all. And Nathan and Ryan and Eric and Alyssa, thank you for hosting the call. Yeah, absolutely want to jump in. And Malka, you made some really great points. Where do I start? This is near and dear to my heart. I would say a couple things, preliminary comments. One is the very reason that Mirko Payments was formed back, 2017, really was to support the sector from a payment standpoint, knowing that the banks were going to struggle, the larger financial institutions were going to struggle to support a newly legal sector that had compliance and regulatory frame that was overlaying it, and really we're sector focused. Sorry, I'm hearing an echo here. Anyone else? No? Okay. Can you hear me all right? Perfect. Okay. So just to back up, so completely sector focused, from a cannabis standpoint, the reason being that, you know, we knew the larger financial institutions would struggle to embrace a newly legal sector. And if you fast forward to today, as you said rightly so, Malka, that you know, the larger banks, despite it being a legal and you know, heavily regulated space, they still really struggle to board customers, which is kind of ironic, because from a Merco standpoint, for example, and we process payments for retailers, dispensaries, for licensed producers, ancillary providers in the space, it's actually quite easy to validate that you're dealing with a legal, compliant counterparty. So, you know, and again, you were pointing out that there's other businesses that are not legal. You know, we're very clear in our underwriting processes around getting the proper documentation to validate those counterparties. Every other participant from a, you know, B2B setting, if they're doing their homework, they could be doing the same. And so for the banks, it's entirely possible that you're right, that they have bank accounts for, you know, non-legal cannabis related businesses. That certainly shouldn't stop them from having bank accounts for legal counterparties. I think you know, talking a little bit about the AML piece, I was at an event, maybe, I guess it was pre-COVID, so a year and a half ago, I want to say, and it was the consultation with some folks from the Ontario government around venues, and whether that was something that the Ontario government should pursue or not. And there were some folks from law enforcement there, and I raised the point with some of them around the lack of enforcement and actually using the financial services aspect of kind of our society, frankly, to further their enforcement activities, meaning that a lot of the sort of legacy market or non-legal businesses that are supplying the sector are using financial services. They're not using our payments solution for sure, but they're maybe leveraging Interac e-transfer, or they're signed up to accept credit cards and debit cards and not properly identified, and therefore being able to use a system that they shouldn't be able to use. And I posed the question to some of the law enforcement people in the room, and they were saying the reality is they just don't have the resources. And in fact, the banks have a visibility, and there is some reporting going into FinTrack on it, but it's just lower on the priority list. And from my perspective, that shouldn't be the case, particularly if there's a concern around money laundering, and that's a priority for us as a country. And frankly, there's been some, you know, not related to the cannabis sector per se, but some negative sentiment around Canada and the ability to perform money laundering in our country. You know, maybe that's a platform angle that we could use to try and help spur the government to take a more active approach towards enforcement. And I appreciate that while it's likely, you know, maybe falls more to the provincial folks, there's maybe perhaps a federal view that we can inspire more. You know, the other piece of it that, you know, has been very relevant with COVID is the fact that the non-legal businesses have been able to, you know, in addition to provide products that have higher, for example, THC, and perhaps more appealing to the market where the legal providers can't compete in terms of products that end consumers want. Also, the way in which they serve customers, for example, being able to provide delivery services in Ontario, whereas the legal retailers have only been able to do that because of COVID and the fact that their stores had to be closed. So I know there was a laundry list, but I think there's a lot to talk about. And Malka, I would just say to you, to the extent that I can help you, your customers, your clients, access, whether it's payment solutions or even banking, you know, we have a lot of sight lines and visibility to those who are open to providing financial services to the sector, and I'd be happy to take that offline.
Excellent. Well, insightful as always, and I suspect we'll pick actually this topic back up, but shortly. But I do want to jump over to Cameron because I know he's had his hand up for a while.
A couple of things. One, I really would like to encourage that we keep this focus on the illicit market. It's one that has not been talked about, and a number of the businesses, small, medium, and large, including ancillary players who have joined the National Cannabis Working Group and taken part in these consultations, did so because the Cannabis Council of Canada was unwilling to take a strong stance against the illicit market. So I'm, as somebody who has fought this battle head on, received threats as a result of doing it, I'd really like to actually shelve conversations about banking services until, or payment services, maybe until the next time, because that's coming in just a couple weeks here. Number one, we actually met with the Cannabis Caucus federally on this issue. We also met as the National Cannabis Working Group, like steering committee members. We also met with the Canadian Bankers Association to find out exactly what was going on. There's a couple of things here, one of which the CBA has informed us, and we were with their anti-money laundering committee chair, among others. And one of the things that they said that they struggle with is that TIPIDA amendments currently are too broad to actually allow them to properly zero in and focus on how to kind of track down these criminal elements. That's number one. So they said that, there was a report that the CBA put out, and I'm happy to circulate it to Eric so that it can be included in this conversation, or at least can be captured. And it talks about the amendments that are needed to PIPIDA to actually be better able to crack down on the illicit market. And I want to be clear, when we talk about the illicit market, I'm not talking about legacy players who are trying to transfer into the system. I am not talking about Indigenous folks who want to, and peoples who want to get into the illegitimate market or the legitimate market. I am talking about the criminal element in this country, the same individuals that payment platforms like Interact and banks refuse to do business with, who traffic in child pornography, who traffic in prostitution, human trafficking, gun running, and those types of activities. We are, I think, kidding ourselves if we don't believe that that is an active piece, and they co-opt the legacy market, and they co-opt the goodness of the compassion clubs and folks who have built this sector. And in that process, they are, I believe, undermining, and they are unfairly, we are unfairly as a result seeing these legacy players being caught up in that conversation, when I believe we need to have a very segmented approach in terms of what we're dealing with. We're talking criminal market activity here that would not be tolerated in any other sector. So yes, I mean, there is stuff that needs to be done by PIPIDA. There is a review that should be happening. I mean, if you look at the way that Public Safety Canada has taken action against online dispensaries, illegal online dispensaries, they are not being aggressive enough. That was certainly the case when we had a conversation with them back in March 2020, and they basically said that they don't really have the resources to do so. In terms of FinTrack, yes, FinTrack would welcome a public-private partnership between the licensed producer industry, the legal cannabis sector, much in the same way that they have developed guidance documents and approaches to different operations that involve transactions for child pornography and other heinous material. But we need that kind of public-private, or that push from members of parliament to be able to kind of get FinTrack to take us up. Last thing I would say is there is a responsibility, I think, by Health Canada to really be looking at, and I think provincial governments as well, when they seize illicit product, if we want people to transition to this market and consumers to transition from the illicit market into our regulated framework so that everybody here can benefit from it, including patients who won't get contaminated product because they're getting it from somebody off the street who is getting it from a supplier somewhere else. I believe what we really need to be seeing from the provincial level is test and release. For God's sake, you're seizing product, test it and release it to the public. And federally, Health Canada has the national testing labs as well. There is absolutely no reason why cannabis seized should not be tested and released. I have talked to the Premier's office in Ontario about this previously when I was with Organogram, when I was the vice chair of the Cannabis Council of Canada, and they've said they keep it in a warehouse and they don't have the money to test. I'm not entirely sure what they're doing with the excise revenue then that they're getting from the federal government, but testing and releasing product will do more to help people transition. But beyond that, there needs to be a more aggressive approach, and there needs to be a hard look at things like the anti-money laundering Act that we have in Canada, as well as the, of course, the Cannabis Act, but also the proceeds and the Criminal Code, Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing Act, and the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, so that we can figure out a proper way here to properly assess where the criminal market is taking over or is undercutting players who have legitimate need and a legitimate want to be part of this, and who are co-opting a legacy movement of people who want to transition. Thank you.
Yeah, really, really terrific and important comments, Cam. And I think a lot to take out of that, right? And I think it is really important that we draw that line between, you know, the true criminal element of the illicit market, as opposed to more legacy producers or indigenous communities that are looking to now transition more into the legal market. So really important distinction there. I think that we can dive a little bit deeper into, you know, focusing both on the, you know, I think on your comments are almost more targeted to the supply, but would love to dig in a little bit as to how we can impact it on the demand side. Again, try to get more people into the legal market, and again, dive a little bit into the transition of legacy producers too. I think Hannah had her hand up, but I don't think it's up anymore. So maybe we'll skip over for her, and we'll go back to Malka and then over to Ryan and Nathan.
Thank you, Eric. Cameron, I really appreciate your points there, and I want to answer Eric's call out first for what do we need to do on the demand side, and it's actually an answer for both, and it comes back to what I said in the first or second roundtable. Education beats stigma for breakfast. This is an example where the people that are buying products off of any illicit source or any source that hasn't been fully regulated, they're needing an education. Right now, I'm seeing examples of, you know, moms in their house ordering online, getting products at their door, where the product at their door looks exactly the same as the product they would find in their nearest store. It has all the same markings on it, has all the same labeling on it, and they trust it because they show up in 2 hours consistently without fail with a TD payment terminal. So I'm wondering, what's the disconnect? They think that product is perfectly fine. It must be legal. It looks like it's legal. It has all of the markings of a legal product. Why should they not believe that? So to the point of Cameron, you know, you suggested that there's a bunch of different things that are happening of criminal element. My question is, what's the highest order of worst offense? Are we talking about the money laundering? Are we talking about hurting people that are of minors? Are we talking about possession limits? I'm asking because I think the highest order problem is money that's moving around this country that's not accounted for like it should be, and it's moving through the legal channels and the legal ways, but just is going undetected because it's attached to a business that doesn't have anything to do with cannabis. And that's my curiosity, is who's responsible for that? Is that a federal thing? Is that a provincial thing? Is that a cannabis thing? Is it somebody else's thing? I'm trying to follow the law to the letter to help my clients to the law to the letter, but they're stymied because the education piece to both the end consumer, the general population that doesn't know the difference between a legal product or one that's from the illicit market, because they look literally the same. So education is in one factor, and also for people that want to become legal but would love to do it because they have a quality product, have lots of great medicinal practice growing, they have an ACMPR license, and they want to do it, but the barriers to entry are too high for things that are not related to finances. So my question again is, there's not such a clear-cut group of people that is doing anything wrong. I believe it comes to the governing bodies in all areas of this country, not just related to cannabis, to have a concerted effort on what's the most damaging part of this criminality. And let's attack that with all of the resources first and do a trickle-down effect from there. So I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm looking for this group or somebody to shed some light on what's the most problematic thing for the country or for whoever that's going to be able to address this with more resources than what they're putting to right now.
All right, well said as always. And we'll go over to Ryan. Maybe Ryan has your answer. We'll see.
Well, that's a lot of pressure, Eric.
I'm just joking.
I actually I just wanted to provide a little more color to Cam's comments and to Fern's as well on sort of the banking system. as Cam mentioned, we did meet with the Canadian Banking Association and some of their sort of senior sort of risk management folks from a few of the banks. And the picture they paint is one that we would kind of expect, which is, they are dealing with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of illegal transactions across all sorts of different criminal elements every year. And it comes down to, as Fern alluded to, and as they told us, resources, which is, they need FinTrack and the government to sort of pick a target for them. They can marshal their limited resources around that target, and then they can make meaningful, they could look for meaningful collaboration with the RCMP and with between FinTrack and the banks to tackle them. And where they focus those efforts are certainly on important areas. It's Cam mentioned a couple of examples. It's human trafficking. It's these types of things. But I do think that tackling these types of transactions, getting them to be a priority for this sector is virtuous, not just because the criminal and money laundering element, but every dollar that we can reduce transactions taking place in the illegal market, unlike a lot of other illegal product and activity, will actually increase purchases and tax revenue and job creation on the legal side. And I think that in it itself can speak to some of the, when governments and FinTrack and others think of cost centers, this is one we can draw a direct line to what the benefits to governments are, in addition to dealing with the criminal elements. So, we're pursuing this in terms of trying to seek support for this to be a priority. But I also think in the context of this review, it would be a worthwhile and thoughtful recommendation for us to really push not just Health Canada, but the federal government as a whole to prioritize dealing with these types of transactions through FinTrack and through these public-private partnerships with the banks and with the RCMP. Eric, I think you're on mute.
I can jump in as the next person in the queue if that would be why Eric fixes his mute, if that's okay with the group.
Yeah, that sounds good. Go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, my name is Nathan Weiss, and I am the CEO of Diplomat Consulting, and lucky enough to be the co-chair of the National Cannabis Working Group. I think just a couple of quick things for level set. I think one of the things that's most exciting about the conversation about how to work towards to expedite the removal of the illegal market is threefold. One, it's by bringing those who want to come into the legal sector through a series of expedited pardons and forgiveness, because certain provinces have allowed cannabis legislation and legalization to occur at different places, such as British Columbia, which had a very different regime. Those legacy retailers who became legal retailers are not allowed to operate in other jurisdictions, like Alberta, for example. That would be one of the ways that we could start to see the legitimacy of that, as well as pardoning systems could allow people to have earlier access into the legal system. The quickest way to displace the legal sector is bringing in all of those from the legal sector who want the opportunity to come in, by reducing red tape, burdens, and opportunities for them to join the legal sector and then pay taxation. That's the first thing I wanted to quickly put on the table. And what that would allow us to do is for all of those who want to go from legacy to legal, it would allow us to eliminate those who are bad actors, who want to act badly and will never potentially join the legal sector. And that way resources can be defined on them by eliminating people who will never partake on that. One of the reasons that the Canadian Chamber was so exciting to create this initiative and partnership is by bringing those to the table who can change the conversations quickly. A couple things. One, cannabis has moved across this country through a variety of transportation companies, of which a lot of them are members of the Canadian Chamber. It would behoove us to involve them in the conversation to identify potential frequent places that distribute illegal cannabis and have a conversation with them and their regulator about how we could involve them in that. Secondarily, the same things can happen when it comes to potentially illegal cannabis that is sold online. You know, there's a very few groups of people that administer all servers in Canada at the same time. And we could perhaps have a conversation again outside of an enforcement ministry where we could be talking to innovation, technology, and other groups to bring other people to the table. So it's not just the solution is policing. I think there's other opportunities to bring other people to the table where we can have different conversations. And then thirdly, I think there's a real interesting opportunity for us to talk, especially when it comes to bricks and mortar retailers that are not only selling illegal cannabis, but they're also doing delivery in multiple jurisdictions, who are growing. And a great example of that is Cafe in Toronto, who won Cannabis Retailer of the Year in Toronto Life. Like, that is, we're in our second year of legalization, and the legal dispensary won Retailer of the Year. And, you know, we're talking about a retailer who's had concrete bricks in front of their doors. Maybe traditional enforcement isn't the way we can do it. You know, there's other mechanisms that we could have a conversation about where if you live off the avails of crime as a landlord, you could therefore have a citation to the landlord of that, and therefore after a couple of citations you would be able to have their business license be in view. So there's other ways for us to go out and do it. I believe the statistic is there's $1.5 billion in Canada of fines that have been levied against illegal dispensaries, of which only $35 million have been collected. The normal process isn't working, so I'm not saying that that's the way, but I think there's other avenues that we have where we can take different approaches to create different enforcement mechanisms that don't always involve the judiciary and the policing, to come up with innovative solutions where we can transition those who want to come into the legal sector and find different ways to add to the enforcement efforts. And that would aid us in financial transactions, distribution, packaging rules. I think there's some real opportunities, and I think the Canadian Chamber and this group is well positioned to have that conversation about innovation and opportunities where it's not just police. So thank you for that opportunity to talk.
Okay, I'm hoping you can hear me. I dropped, my computer crashed, so I had to dial back in. I won't lie, I missed all of your comments, Nathan. I won't make you tell them again, but I'm sure you and I will catch up. So I apologize, and I'll be certainly listening back to the recording. But in full disclosure, I was offline for about the last few minutes. But we'll jump over to Will and then over to Kim Purchase. And apologies again for having these tech issues today.
Go ahead.
So Will, over to you if you're still there. You should be unmuted. Okay, maybe Will come back. Is Kim there?
Eric, it's Lisa. Will had a note in the chat, and he asked if someone could raise the question because he couldn't get his mic working. So I can read the question and see if people have a comment.
Oh, terrific.
Will says, can we discuss CBD-specific stores? My understanding is that any storefronts selling CBD-specific products are doing so illegally. My team has waited for 8 years to obtain a cannabis processing permit and legally create and distribute CBD, yet there are companies importing hemp flower from the US and directly selling it publicly. Both, my understanding, is illegal. Will this be enforced to stop? It's hard to compete against people selling products that are not regulated. And that's, I guess, a comment and a question in there.
Yeah, no, and I guess I think, Lisa, probably you and I, that's something that you and I deal with on a day in and day out basis with working with clients, right? And there is so much confusion around the CBD laws in Canada, and you know, that's been made even worse with kind of the deregulation of CBD in the United States. Everybody kind of thinks Canada is the more progressive when it comes to cannabis and cannabis-related matters, and that's not always the case, particularly with CBD. So, you know, agree with a lot of the statements in that comment in terms of what Will said, and you know, it's a challenge. I can tell you from where I sit at our law firm, we've been approached by multiple potential clients who are selling CBD products, and you know, we don't take them on. We have to turn them down immediately, because you're right, as much as these products may be available and you can find them in very prominent retailers all over Canada, but you're right, at the heart of it, these are unless, you know, they're derived from a very specific type of hemp, which is highly unlikely, they're in all likelihood illegal products. So it is a problem, and I think one of the things we've chatted about as a group in the past is really focusing on making changes to the regulatory regime for CBD. So I know that's top of mind, is going to be certainly one of the initiatives that this group puts forward over the course of the next few months. So terrific comments. And maybe we'll go over to Kim. Oh, go ahead.
I would just add there that I think you can divvy that group into illegal products, but also legal products that have misleading claims on it. So they're not actually CBD products, they're hemp products, which are not actually illegal, and they can be sold in the pharmaceutical store, but they're making claims that are completely false. And so they should be subject to a different regime of misleading advertising to ensure that you're preventing that customer confusion. So that is, you know, that is an area that hasn't been picked up by the consumer protection agencies, which would be a different enforcement mechanism necessarily than the CFIA, which would be stopping sort of the illegal products at the border. So there's two ways of tackling that illicit CBD market, so to speak.
Yeah, and that may be one of the areas where we actually can learn a little bit from the US, because I know the FDA and FTA and all the various regulators in the US are very focused, as much as CBD products are generally deregulated to a certain extent in the United States. The regulations around those products being able to make certain health claims is still, you know, not permitted at all, and something that they're very focused on. So that's actually one area where we may have a lot to learn from our neighbors to the south. But maybe we'll go over to Kim and then over to Sabrina.
Betty, thanks for taking my question. I actually have two quick questions, more so than a comment. The first one, I guess, would be, you know, many of us are talking to government on a variety of issues now as we head into statutory review. And I guess one of the things I'm curious about from this group is, to what extent does, you know, from your interactions, does the federal government see the illicit market as being a major priority at this point? I mean, StatsCan has indicated that we're somewhere around 50%, according to StatsCan, of conversion within a couple of years of the illicit to the licit market. So I'm curious as to, you know, how much folks, you know, what sort of sense folks have in terms of the level of priority assigned. And then I guess secondarily, within, not unlike economic mandates, within the scope of statutory review and the powers of the minister and the act, where do we see this topic fitting in to some of the, like, the efforts that we're planning to undertake with respect to statutory review? Thanks.
It's a fair point. I think that's almost going to be, you know, from my perspective, that's going to be the hardest part of what we're trying to accomplish here, is actually, you know, I think everybody seems to be very much aligned, at least so far, in terms of acknowledging that there's a problem here, but trying to come up with literally changing words in statutes that will actually have an impact on this issue is going to be the hard part. Like, that's really where the proof is in the pudding, and it's one thing to for all of us sit here and talk about and acknowledge the problem, but actually giving the government either language or tools that they can go ahead and utilize. That's where it's going to involve, I think, frankly, a lot of creativity from this industry. But this industry has always shown it has the ability to be creative. So maybe we'll jump over to Sabrina next.
So my comment is regarding personal medical marijuana permits. I wasn't here for the first 15 minutes, so please stop me if this was already covered. But there's a big loophole with growing medical marijuana, especially in Quebec, with the Sûreté du Québec that is comes to bust some illegal operations, but people use medical marijuana permits as an excuse or as a proof that they can stay open. So the Circuit du Québec cannot do anything. Moreover, municipalities have asked Health Canada for a list of who are actually legal and illegal grow operations, and Health Canada won't provide that information, so it makes it pretty difficult for police officers to do their job. So I was wondering, so I understand that we're opening a can of worms because it's a Supreme Court decision allowing personal medical growth, but my suggestion is maybe for Health Canada to review their criteria, that personal consumption of growing 400 plants for one patient. Probably, I don't know where they got those numbers, but maybe that could be reviewed to lower the so that's just an idea floating around of how to maybe target the illegal market. So I'll leave it up to you if I'm kind of opening up a can of worms with since it's a Supreme Court decision, but just putting it out there.
Excellent. Thanks as always for the contribution. And I see Cameron back, so we'll go over to Cameron.
Just really quick on Sabrina's point, that's an excellent point. You know, I think Ryan will recall, or certainly Nathan, when we met with Diane Finley, who's the outgoing member of parliament for, I can't remember, but it's somewhere around Caledonia. She's talking a great deal, spoken rather a great deal about those very points that Sabrina raised. It is kind of a hornet's nest in terms of how they deal with, but she calls it the Emerald Triangle down there, where some of these folks have these licenses and are using them or got them not for their own personal use as the Supreme Court would allow, but to do things that are undercutting the legality of the market as itself. And she's found that's a great deal of concern for her. And the RCMP and the OPP are not able to go into these facilities, and they are posing significant danger to those communities. So I think Sabrina makes a really good point of an action that could be taken by Health Canada to look into this in coordination with public safety and provincial territorial law enforcement.
Excellent. Oh, I see we're actually at no hands up right now, which is a little bit rare. So we'll wait to see if anybody else wants to chime in. And then one topic I think, and I see Ryan's put his hand up, so we'll go to him in a second. You know, one thing I would love more thoughts on is talking about things that we can do, changes to the Cannabis Act that would help with that transition of legacy producers into the regulated market. Again, very focused on enforcement, like we've talked about, giving the government the tools, but we also have to make life easier, presumably, for people who were previously in the illicit market and are now looking to participate in the legal market. So any thoughts on that topic would certainly be welcome as well, but maybe we'll jump back to Ryan.
Yeah, just a technical thing. I think a few people, at least including myself and Nathan, were having trouble following the chat. It wasn't updating for us. Both of us logged out and logged back in, and now I'm seeing messages again. So there's been about 25 or 30 messages. If you aren't seeing anything in the chat, that's why. And so if you want to log out and log back in, you'll be able to fix whatever glitch has been causing that, if anyone else was experiencing that.
Yeah, I actually don't know if my chat's been updating, so that's a helpful reminder. So we'll go to Hannah and then over to Tabitha.
Am I on mute?
Yeah, you're unmuted. We can hear you, Hannah.
Okay. My name is Hannah. I'm with Valley Cannabis in the Comox Valley. My history is in administration. And in law administration and real estate administration. So I've been watching for a while sort of how the wrong groups get saddled with solving a much bigger problem. So having a realtor fill out a FinTrack doesn't stop anybody from money laundering, and you have law offices on the other side who are supposed to be going through and making sure that everything is also done legally. So it's sort of like this group, cannabis is not money laundering, just as teamsters and truck drivers aren't all trafficking in humans, but these things have sort of been all encompassed. And I'm wondering, can we not sort of separate that? Because I don't know how a legal cannabis market will solve all of the illegal money laundering when the layers of what is illegal is multifaceted, much the way restaurants are long-standing sources of laundering money. And so calling on restaurants and food, I think that is a more suitable comparative pathway for us, in the sense that it's hard enough to run this business. It's hard enough to run any business. Having a diluted market doesn't mean that we're going to have like a diluted market. Having people get in there and try, and making it easier for them by having, you know, the basic Health Act standards on Vancouver Island, which is where I'm from. We call it VHA, the Vancouver Island Health Authority. And that goes back to the Health Act. You know, are you making it clean? Do you follow human rights? Are you doing it this way? And go ahead, open your restaurant, open your cannabis shop, open your cannabis grow-op. And then as they, you know, fall apart, well, that was an administration problem. That was a hiring problem. That was, you know, they couldn't manage to keep it going. So I don't know, I guess it's just the two parts. One, we could work towards a completely different model, but also, can we circle back to sort of, I think I'm missing something because it sounds like we're talking about how we're going to be responsible for changing money laundering. And that's it.
Sorry, I don't think we're talking about trying to, as an industry, tackle money laundering any more than Child Protective Services think that they're going to tackle child pornography and the money laundering that goes in on there either, right? But we do have an element of that is infecting the transition to the regulated market and impeding entry. And I think that, you know, the federal government has been woefully inadequate in this area. They have flat out told us in meetings, as I said in the chat at the Public Safety Minister's office, that they are that there's really little more that they can do. You know, FinTrack as well, with their limited resources, Ryan alluded to, I think they get something like 20 million data hits a year on illicit traffics, and of those, last year they investigated 4,000 of them. I mean, so there is more that can be done. I'm not suggesting, or I don't think anybody should, that we're going to solve the crisis of the illegal market. But I do think that it is incumbent upon us that are acting within the regulated framework to come up with some ideas about how we facilitate entry of those who want to join the legacy market, while at the same time cracking down on the criminal market, and who are some of them running these illegal supplier chains and running these illegal online dispensaries. There has to be more that can be done. It will only help backstop some of the businesses that are already out there.
Some of this ties back. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Hannah.
Oh, no, I was just saying, okay, that helped. That was some clarity there.
Yeah, and so much of this, I think, Cameron, ties back to some of the other really good discussions we've had in the past about, you know, making life easier for people who are in the, you know, in the legal market, right? And again, not to go back, I know we're focused so much on the illicit market, but it really all dovetails together. You know, if you're going to encourage people to move into the legal market, you got to make it almost worth their while and make a framework that works, that isn't too complex, too cumbersome, and allows them to be as successful, and ideally far more successful in the legal market than they ever could be in the illicit market. But I see Tabitha has had her hand up for a while, so maybe we'll jump over to her.
Thank you. So my perspective is from the legacy market, actually. My company, Fritz's Cannabis Company, started out making edibles in the legacy market in 2015 or 2016. And our goal was always to transition to the regulated marketplace when that became available to us. We started trying to do that in 2018, and it was very, very difficult. What we found was that the landscape was advantageous to people and companies who were already well-established, well-connected, and well-financed, which we were not. You know, we were a small legacy company. And I think that is changing now. There seems to be that it is becoming easier to partner with LPs or with others in the industry who have licenses already, but it's still really difficult. And you often feel that it's a bit predatory, or that someone is trying to take advantage of you and your knowledge that you have. and not compensate you adequately for that. I think that also, and I know a lot of legacy market players, and I know a lot of people who continue to produce in the legacy market. Not necessarily growers, but a lot of edibles producers and other 2.0 products producers. And many of them do not trust the regulated marketplace because of the bad trust events that have happened with many of the licensed producers, right? We hear about things like CanTrust and you know, different things that have happened that have caused people to lose trust in the regulated cannabis industry. And many of the illicit market producers say, I don't want to get into bed with that. I'm not interested in partnering with that kind of thing. I care about the plant. I care about the patient. I care about the person, right? I'm not interested in engaging in these other kinds of activities. So I think there's this sort of tension between, you know, existing producers and in the legal market and the legacy market producers about how you're going to conduct your activities and conduct your business and what kind of trust with the public you're going to have. So I think that's one piece of it. And then I also think there's this tension between the different kinds of skill sets, right? So in the legacy market, you develop this really on the ground CEO, chief everything officer skill set. You're like, I can do it all. I can figure out how to take payments. I can figure out how to you know, ship or whatever these things that I have to do to get around rules or whatever it is. You figure things out really, really well. That's your skill set, right? Being able to do stuff. And then you come and you meet with these LPs or licensed producers or others who are in the industry, and they're like, well, you don't have business skills, right? I have an MBA, and I've had people tell me that I don't have the business skills to survive in this industry. So let alone all the people out there who don't have a business background, right? We have to find a way to allow everybody to work together and to coordinate, to collaborate, and to bring those skills together. Both of these skill sets are really important. We have to find a way to bring them together in order to move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's you know, really powerful statement, and I think right on point. And I see, when watching my screens, I see a lot of head noddings to those comments, Tabitha. So maybe we'll jump over to Dennis. I know Dennis is part of the terrific CanDelta team and probably also has some thoughts to add.
Okay, can you hear me? Did you unmute me?
Yeah, you're good to go, Dennis.
Okay. All right, so I'm at CanDelta, as Eric mentioned, a senior regulatory advisor, but my background actually for 20 years has been in regulating sin industries, tobacco control, alcohol, gambling. So I was head of compliance at the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, for example. And in that role, I was the commission's liaison with FinTrack for a number of years. So I have a pretty good idea of how that agency operates and its warts and its strengths and so forth. And I agree with earlier statements that they are overburdened. Their focus is almost entirely on the chartered banks and, you know, to a much lesser extent actually on casino gaming, even though that's an abundant funnel for illicit money. And there was a situation in BC, which most of you are probably aware of, where there were some pretty flagrant violations. And so I can only imagine how low on the totem pole cannabis is, you know, in their priority list. On the other hand, there is a problem here in the sense that the government has made a major point about trying to curb the illicit market. And that's only going to happen with a well-orchestrated series of carrots and sticks. So some of you have talked about the carrots, about providing better financial incentives and support for businesses that want to transition from the legacy market and so forth. But the stick side needs some attention as well. And there are operators, and I know this from my background in tobacco and illicit tobacco, that a number of enterprises do have links to serious organized crime organizations. And the only way you're going to eventually catch some of that or turn off some of those taps is by having a capable, dedicated anti-money laundering team at FinTrack who is looking at that. And I don't think they're going to do this overnight, but I think the chamber should consider in its sort of package of assists to shift away from the illegal market to begin to also do more analysis so that it has a better handle on what's going on. As things stand, it seems almost entirely left up to the provinces building out a retail network. And I'm not sure that's going to be enough by itself. And that's basically all I have to say on the topic.
and you know, it's interesting to hear you coming from, given your background with other industries. I think there's, you know, continually a lot to learn that the cannabis industry can learn from others. So actually, we're back to no hands up again. So I'll see if anybody wants to chime in. Certainly don't want to wrap this up early unless everybody has actually said their piece. Again, going back to some of the things we've talked about, really, and really would actually more of encourage everybody to take a look at the chat if you haven't followed along. Other than, you know, it's a lot of applauding Tabitha on her earlier comments, but beyond that, I think a lot of other meaningful comments there as well. So you know, maybe I'll give a minute or two to see if anybody else wants to chime in. Certainly, we do have another 25 minutes. Again, these have all gone quite long before. Oh, I see Nathan is back, and this is good because I'm most excited to see Nathan's hand up because I didn't get to hear his comments the first time around. So I always need my little slice of Nathan. But I think you're on mute, unless it's just me who can't hear you.
Everybody hear me now? Thumbs up?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Perfect. Thanks, Nathan.
I think Dennis raised a really interesting point as we're having this conversation, and tying on to what Tabitha said as well, is that, you know, one of the things that is the most problematic when we have this conversation about the cannabis sector in general, but of course enforcement of the illegal sector as a part of it, is the disconnect between federal efforts and provincial efforts. And then, of course, how the municipalities play in that. A coordinated approach between municipal enforcement, provincial measures underneath the federal auspices for an act is something that has been completely remiss in this conversation. And the challenge is, you know, unfortunately, as we know, sometimes in government, you know, even though they're equal orders of government, what they'll say to you is the feds will create something that will go to the province, and then the province will do their best to interpret it, and then it'll be pushed on to the municipality, who has to bear most of the cost, most of the responsibility, without any of the money and any of the resources. So I think as we're having this conversation about the efforts for enforcement, and the illicit market and FinTrack, we should be having the conversation about how we bring all three orders of government into those conversations to create clearer lines of roles and responsibilities, combined effort, and unlocking orders of government opportunities to aid in enforcement, such as bylaw when it comes to business licenses for landlords who are giving stores to illegal operations, or for transportation rules at a provincial level, or how the coordinated effort of the provinces can work together with the with the federal government through the provincial federal government roundtable. So I would love to make sure that as we're pushing these conversations forward, we make sure that we represent that this is an issue, that clear roles, responsibilities, and conversation about. One of the main tenets of Cannabis Act legalization was the elimination of the illicit market. And unfortunately, we're not doing that job because nobody knows how to do it, and nobody knows who's responsible. And the money that is being collected for it is not being deployed to it. And just one quick point, and I think it's a really salient one that was made earlier, is it starts with basic levels of understanding and education. Something as simple as, what does an illegal product look like, and what does a legal product look like? That would be something that would be really easy to do. I had an interesting opportunity to be sitting in an office of influence at a provincial level, and the individual came in, and I was introduced, as I frequently am, as the cannabis guy, and the guy's like, "Oh, I love cannabis. I buy my CBD from Moda," and I'm like, well, just to throw it out there, he on high, because you're a mucky muck in the government, you're buying a legal product. Like, that is illegal. And he's like, and he's one of the people that should be making the rules. So when our decision makers don't even know themselves, that's a pretty big problem. So, you know, one of the things that I'll leave it with is education, but I think education for our bureaucrats, our politicians, and our influencers as well, because they don't know sweet F all. So on that note, thanks very much, guys.
It's terrifying, that story, to be honest. Sitting here, I think
I have one
before
more
people's heads were nodding, and then there everybody's jaws hit the floor.
I have one more good one for some of the people who are in Alberta. Perhaps sitting in a finance minister's room when he's telling us that there's not a legal vape in Alberta. So what we did is we opened Weedmap and ordered a legal vape to his office, and then kept refreshing it so it could get closer and closer to him to see, and then canceled the order as he started to freak out. But anyways, we digress.
All right, we'll go to Ryan,
Fun day.
and then over to Hannah, and back, and then to Cameron.
Yeah, just so I'm glad we've got a few more people that want to chime in here to use up our time. I will do one more plug before we get towards the end to fill out our survey, which you can sort of add some additional context or agree or disagree or add some information. Christy posted a link in the chat to fill that out. You know, one of the things in there that we haven't talked about as much here, because frankly we've talked about it in other sessions, is the demand side and sort of how do we win the hearts and minds and educate consumers, as Nathan just alluded to, or even decision makers when it comes to you know, building brands and creating affinity that consumers can have for legal brands the same way they do for other consumer products. And you know, we have covered a lot of those issues in previous discussions, but in the survey, if there's, you know, whether it's the marketing and branding issue, if it's price or cost, like what are the other sort of the single biggest element that folks here think would help us on the demand side, please you know, indicate that in the survey. And Nathan, I'll look out the chat for you to identify the mucky muck that's shopping at Moda in the chat, because we're all of course dying to know.
All right, we'll go to Hannah and then to Cameron, please.
Thank you. Oh. I'm in?
You're in.
Okay. Thank you for your patience. It does take me sometimes a while to wrap my head around some things. Recalling back to a previous roundtable where we were talking about advertising, and that there was nobody taking control over the board like they do with tobacco and alcohol. And perhaps to pile onto what Nathan is saying and what Malka is talking about, if we could include the Canadian Advertising Board and ask them to take some onus in this and put out a campaign. In my community, we have a very high demographic of seniors, and the CBD and cannabis are actually really great for a lot of their ailments, and they don't know. And I think that guiding an advertising campaign, you know, like the more you know, that's actually out there. And since we can't do it because we're so limited in what we can advertise, maybe they could take that on and spread that out there to say, you know, yes, it's legal, but no, this isn't, and no, this isn't, and no, that isn't, because we have to find a way to get that out there. Okay, I'm done.
No, by all means, helpful as always. Cameron, over to you.
So a couple things, and I actually want to ask a question of Tabitha and those who have been in the legacy market, but first, a couple things. Branding, marketing, absolutely critical. They need to lighten up a little bit in terms of what should be allowed to do, including on promotion. You go to California, and I'm not holding that up as a fantastic model. They've certainly got their own problems with an 80-20 split on the illicit market right now. But you go there, there are some advertisements that are public, and you know what? The last I checked, when I was down in LA, it didn't. Society hadn't collapsed yet. So I think that there are some flexibilities that we could do that go beyond just the age gating. I've said this before as well. Health Canada needs to drop this stuff about compliance with the marketing regulations and then compliance with the spirit of the act. And they can do that by having a more iterative conversation with the sector about what is allowable. And again, economic mandate, people. If there's an economic mandate, then Health Canada as a regulator isn't just going to be able to lock everything down, lock, stock, and barrel. So that's number one. Number two, the excise tax. Look, the average cost of per gram is going down. The excise tax has not changed. As a result, that is more expensive for consumers. So if what you're trying to do is facilitate more entry of even customers who favor the illicit market right now, even if you change the calculation to like, I don't know, 5% or 10% versus 10% or $1 a gram, you're going to attract more folks to the regulated sector, I believe. Lastly, national excise stamp would be a hell of a boost for everybody, because it would have one stamp. It could move product across the country much easier, repurpose products much easier, less cost and less waste, less labor costs. But my question to Tabitha and those who have transferred over from the legacy is, what were the regulatory hurdles? I mean, you talked a lot, and I agree with the points you made about the perception, the mistrust, the big players, and I hear all of that. But my question is when you looked at some of the regulatory pieces, like when we go and talk to Health Canada, they say, well, we can't, we're having issues getting the micros to come on board or getting the legacy players in. What are the top 3 issues from a regulatory piece that you look at and say, you know what, I can't do that. I don't have the capacity to do it. I don't have the skill sets, whatever it is. What are the 3 things or 2 things or even 1 thing that could be done to make this better?
We'll jump back to Tabitha, because I know she's put her hand up and was, and again, really important part of the discussion. I have some thoughts to add as well, but let's go over to Tabitha.
So I would say one of the biggest barriers, and it has to do with regulation, but also not, is financing. So in order to get in, you have this facility that is fully built out. It's very expensive to do that, to get all of the licensees. So you either have to be really well financed, or you have to go in with somebody else who is. So I would say, number one, that's the number 1 barrier. Number 2, it's changing a bit more, but it's been this way for a long time. It was really it felt at least like an old boys network, right? Everybody kind of knows each other in these circles. A lot of these people have, networks from outside of cannabis, from government or other business things that they've done in. And it's difficult to break into that network if you're not already part of it, or if you don't have an in, which isn't regulatory, but it is contextual. And then, I would say that one of the most difficult regulatory barriers, and I don't know that it is something that could be or should be changed, is the way that you have to make your products. Now, I'm coming from an edibles perspective, so I don't know how different it is to grow under Health Canada regulations than you would under other regulations, right? But we just submitted our NNCPs yesterday, our first ones. Thank you, very excited. But prior to that, the amount of paperwork that I had to do and the ways that I had to set up my shop and set up my procedures of doing things, like it's almost prohibitive if you're not an incredibly organized and like logically thinking person, right? Mm-hmm. And many of the people that I know personally from the legacy market are not very organized and like ordered people. They're just not, right? And that's one of the reasons they gravitated towards the legacy market or cannabis to begin with. So I don't know that that's something that can or should be changed. Like you need to have these rules in place in order to make sure that you have safe products for people to consume. But that is a huge barrier for many people, is to find out that you have to go from kind of just doing whatever you're doing in your commercial kitchen to having all of these regulations that you have to meet and be, Health Canada is going to come and assess you and audit you and all of these things. It's a completely different environment in which to produce a product.
Would it help, really quick, would it help to have like an entry office, like an economic entry office for, small, micro, medium players that is actually like acting like, I'm going to use New Brunswick, Opportunities New Brunswick, which is a facilitation of business generally, but, with grants and the ability to help you navigate, almost like a mentorship program that kind of walks you through all these things and helps you with, or like BDC does, where they assign folks to you and they work you through that.
Absolutely. That would be huge. That would be, I think, an incredibly valuable tool for helping legacy market players get into the regulated marketplace. They need a lot of scaffolding, and the more that you can provide, the easier it will be for them to get there.
And even beyond that, one of the things we haven't really touched on, but you hear it all the time for people who are still accessing the illicit market is, you know, they think the quality's better too. And you know, it's hard because there's a lot of talented people in the, you know, in the legacy market. And, you know, from what I've heard and speaking with folks, when you try to transition and move from illicit into legal, it's actually hard to maintain the quality of product that, you know, you may have developed a following or, and again, I think that works both ways too, right? It's giving tools for people who are trying to transition into the legal market to be able to still create and develop and distribute high quality products that your consumers are looking for. And beyond that, there's got to be tools, I think, that we give to existing LPs that make their life easier and allow them. Like, you can't continually hear, and we've heard it for years already, oh, it's not as good. The stuff I go and I buy down the street in the store, it's just not as good. And, you know, as Dennis correctly pointed out in the chat, people don't realize a lot of the things in the illicit market, they don't know what they're necessarily getting. But from a quality perspective, there's a general sense out there that the quality of the illicit market is better. And I'm not suggesting that's true, but the bottom line is perception is reality. And there is a strong perception right now that that is the case. And I think that's really, it's a huge problem. And I'm not exactly sure how we address it, but we got to make sure that people who are participating in the legal market have the tools to develop high quality products that people gravitate to, and that'll, you know, shift the demand. Again, you got to look at this, I think, from both the supply side and the demand side. But Tabitha, maybe we'll jump back to you and then over to Malka.
Yeah, I just wanted to really quickly say that that's, I think, a very important point. So we, like I said yesterday, we submitted our first 2 NNCPs. They are for our gummies, which were wildly popular in the legacy market, but they include a couple of ingredients that we aren't sure if we're able to use in the regulated marketplace. We've called Health Canada, we've called the AGCO, we have spoken to the LP that we're working with, and we cannot get a straight answer on any of these ingredients. So we submitted 6 NNCPs, all have different ingredients, so hopefully one of them goes. But it's incredibly frustrating to not be able to get a straight answer as to whether or not this single ingredient is allowed to be in my product.
Yeah. So I don't even know how to respond to that. Other than I agree. I can see how that might be frustrating. Malka, over to you. Oh.
And I'll speak into my mic better so that everyone can hear me. Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. So I did want to touch on the quality piece and it being a hindrance from a perception is 100% reality to people that are trying to come into the legal world fully and wanting to do it right, but their quality product and what it is going to turn into when it's put inside a package that's far beyond when it was actually supposed to be delivered to its customer. So the time lag between when it's harvested and when it's delivered, like a fresh vegetable, has an optimal timing. And I think John Fowler said it best from 7 Acres, is that they had to reverse engineer what that looked like for 7 Acres to put a high quality product inside a package. And in the real world of frozen and fresh and produce world, we understand that a ton of things are added to that product that are not okay to be added in the cannabis world, or just aren't even defined yet, that allows for optimum freshness and things like that. So we're still at this phase where we haven't figured out that simple thing, and that's a major barrier for people that are growing something with so much passion and with so much love and amazing quality for medicinal purposes. But the medicinal purposes are all the benefits that are even just qualitatively felt are completely annihilated when you put it inside a package, and you lose the terpenes and you lose the potency and you lose the smell and the flavor and all the things that make it good. So the mentality on that side that I've heard over and over and over again is, why would I want to take something that I spent my life making perfect only to make it be crappy as soon as I bring it into the legal realm? That's the perception, which is the reality here. And we haven't addressed those yet on the legal side. So I think that's a barrier to entry that hasn't been discussed yet, but is one that is a reason why, even though they want to do it legally, they want to produce a product that they can share with more people, the barriers around ruining the thing that they figured out how to do so well when it comes into this realm.
Really what we're hearing is, their barriers are almost twofold. There's the one, just a pure economic one, and I think Cameron and Tabitha touched really nicely on that in terms of whether it's subsidies or grants, or coming up with a framework that really can hold the hands and wrap their arms around folks from the legacy market and help bring them in and make it economically viable. This group has talked plenty about the lack of economic mandate here So that's obviously a very important component about that. But you're right, giving those folks the tools to be successful once they've actually got into the legal market, you know, through the additional government help that maybe they can provide, making sure that they can still have that continuity of quality product that people come to expect. And again, that in my mind is really what's going to go the longest way. As I said before, you can obviously try to hit this on the supply side. You can try to hit this from the demand side. In a perfect world, you try to do both. But I think realistically, the demand, at least from my perspective, being able to shift demand is really going to be the most helpful to the overall process. And then that will make it obviously more worthwhile for legacy operators to shift into the legal market, right? If that's where the demand goes, the supply will obviously, I think, generally go where the demand goes. But you got to get a high quality supply into the legal market, and that's going to help cover both of these issues, I think. Nope, I see Malka wants to chime in again, by all means.
I'm going to say that the answer that I've heard as the fastest and best way is to go through do a farm gate. So the BC growers are doing it, and as well as in Ontario. The concept of 100-mile or 100-kilometer food also applies to cannabis. So like a farmer's market or available in their local area, we can do it with food. We should really encourage that model to go over to the cannabis world as fast as possible. That will help both the economic perspective, the allowance for there be a framework for regulatory purpose, like just how farmers markets are, or wineries that have a store up front. That's already in place in all these places. The ecotourism, the cannabis tourism, I believe the farm gate is an answer to a lot of the problems that have been discussed here, and allow for the frameworks that already exist to manage them, but on the cannabis side, and make it a level playing field for cannabis to be an economic driver, a medical driver, a therapeutic driver, a fresh product driver, and a reason for Canada to stand out as a leader in this industry.
So checking, don't know if I see any other hands. Maybe we'll give everybody another 30 seconds or so to see if anybody wants to make some final comments. Otherwise, I think that was quite on point. Oh, I see Hannah has her hand up, so we'll open the mic to you. And your heart symbols during Malka's last comment certainly weren't lost on me either. So I think you're just on mute. There you go, Hannah.
I love that idea, especially where we have this juxtaposition right now with companies like Aurora, who have gone to a wholesale model. As like a small community farm food person, I find it appalling that this is just a white bottle and a label, and it's all the same. It can be 5 different companies all using this one massive grower, and that grower, circling back around to the topic, is a company and it's a corporation. And let's look at the board of directors, and where did that board of directors get started, and do they have all of their money in this country? And then we're looking at, you know, this idea that money laundering is a small thing, when money laundering is an insidious corporate beast as well. So when you have a giant corporation that can make these products that are homogenized and right out the door again, we lose all of the things that were so wonderful about cannabis to begin with, going and knowing, you know, old Uncle Joe's got this great push right now, I'm going to head up to his place, and we looked at it and we shook his hand, and you knew him, and that was that. And you could make eye contact and you could support that person. And I think we lose that when we go into mass market like that. So how does the small group, going back, you know, the small farmer, how do they get it out there? Ecotourism, yes. Cannabis tourism, going to the farmer, seeing how they do it. It's no different than, you know, in Ontario where they import grapes and then they call it Ontario wine. It's not. Yeah. It's not the same. It's not the same.
It's really funny, and I've had this conversation with so many people, Hannah, on a similar point. Like in the legal market, I think one of the problems, and I think, again, the goal is to try to make the legal market that much more inviting and better so that people will gravitate towards that. It feels very transactional is the bottom line, and that's something we hear all the time, right? There's not like, you know, it's not like if you're in a smaller community, you have your community restaurant or your community store that you really, or pub that you really want to support. You know, we act for lots of licensed retailers. They run terrific shops, but ultimately it is very transactional. You walk in, you go up to the counter, you place your order, you give your credit card, you take your little bag, and you walk out of the store. There's no real sense of community, at least in my mind. None of the retailers, some have done better than others in that respect, but I do think it's a really valid point. Like, it's hard to develop a community. In a perfect world, we'd almost like some of these stores to almost be gathering hubs, right? Where you can go and you can hang out with people from your community and support local stores, as opposed to just walk in, here's my credit card, take my little bag with my, you know, all my labels and my childproof packages, and just walk out and go home. So I think it's a really interesting point, and I think it's something that has to be considered, because promoting that sort of sense of community, I think, would go a long way in having people feel more comfortable and get that sort of good feeling that they're looking for from the legal community. So on that note, I do think we're getting close to time. Maybe I will turn it back to Ryan for some final remarks. I know we have our last one of these roundtables coming up in 2 weeks that I'm sure Ryan will mention again, but this has been terrific. We've been sitting here with our team taking very detailed notes, and really want to thank everybody for all of their terrific contributions today. And back over to you, Ryan.
Great. Well, thanks. And I want to sort of just quickly thank you, Eric, for, again, your terrific job moderating the session. It's not easy to listen to what people are saying, keep your eye on the chat, watch whose hands are raised, all while navigating some technical difficulties. So excellent job, as always. And I just want to really thank everyone for taking some time. As Eric said, this is now 5 of 6 of these complete. You know, we've had hundreds and hundreds of participants. The discussion in the chat and in these sessions has filled up 90 minutes very quickly each time. So I'm just really grateful for all the contributions that everybody who's taking time to listen in or speak up are making to this, because it's really, really important and helpful for us to inform the first part of our work as an industry association on this important task in front of us. So we have one more coming up in 2 weeks. If you haven't registered and you'd like to participate, please do. That will start to wind up the public portion of our work. If your business is interested in more formal participation with the Canadian Chamber and the National Cannabis Working Group, please send us an email, cannabis@chamber at any time. We'd obviously love to involve you in that work and all the other things that we have going on. So with that, I'll say thanks again, Eric. Thanks again, Dentons and Davies, for making this happen, and for everybody who's taken time. And we'll see, I'm sure most of you here in a couple of weeks for our final session. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon.